This is the Definitely Uncertain podcast, brought to you by Goldrock Capital. Each week, we look at how high net worth families can improve their lives, decisions, and investments in a deeply uncertain world. We always aim to provide practical information, even if we can't offer specific investment advice. Welcome to the latest podcast from Goldrock Capital in our series of Definitely Uncertain. And it is my great pleasure to have with us today Paul Pratt, who is a director in the UK offices of PKF, and he specializes in the world of services to family offices and actually offering to families all of the range of services that you expect a global accounting and professional services firm to do. And today we're going to talk really about the world of succession. And in particular, hopefully what we're going to be able to try and do is look at some of those Archimedes points in the life cycle of a family where, you know, either huge mistakes could be made or potentially huge gains can be made through a successful succession process. I know it's something which Paul has spent a lot of time working on with families. And but maybe the first thing we should do is welcome Paul, obviously, to the podcast. So welcome.
Thank you, Daniel.
And really just let's start by saying, Paul, how did you end up in the world of family offices, and opportunity also just to tell us a little bit about the sort of worldview of PKF and family offices?
Great. No, Daniel, firstly, thank you for inviting me on. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I think for me, I fell into the world somewhat a number of years ago. I was headhunted actually by a global network of family offices called Family Office Exchange, actually back in 2008. So what is that, 13 years ago? But I was also rather privileged to be, I'm a G2 family member of a construction group, one of the largest family-owned construction groups here in the UK as well. But I didn't realise what that meant until I started working at Family Office Exchange, interestingly enough. So I was the international managing partner at Family Office Exchange. We worked with a number of families, sort of pre and post liquidity. So really helping them, I suppose, redefine who they are, what they do, what the glue is, particularly once you move on from an operating entity, but really, looking at those sort of transitions. So that was my sort of first introduction. And then really made me realize and evaluate sort of my own situation as well. My parents founded a business 33 years ago. I'm one of 5 siblings. So, you have a degree of complexity there. I also chose not to go into the operating entity, although my father still occasionally phones up and goes, "Oh, you're not that busy. Can you help with the following?" So, there's always the family thing, which is fantastic. I'm proud and privileged to have the two hats, I think, in that respect. And then, for PKF, we launched our sort of international London operation dedicated to families, funds and family offices just over 3 years ago. And yes, as you mentioned, we serve and support families across the full range of accounting suite services, in addition to building out a governance sort of family enterprise / family business practice. And also we have a fund administration capability. And so it's very interesting times. I mean, just as a sort of time lag, if I go back to 2008, when I sort of started first working at Family Office Exchange, and you look today, family office name is very synonymous and people say it kicking around, but it can mean many things to many people. Whereas I think back in 2008, it was probably less known. So I think we see a lot more families either talking about it, looking to do it, or looking to understand it, I think, in that respect. Terrific.
So, getting into the topic that we wanted to sort of dive into a little bit today, and we have at least one thing in common, which is this sort of falling into the world of family offices and understanding actually the situation and the needs of the family before we realized that there was such a thing called a family office, which in a certain way, I think, parallels a lot of the succession type issues that families often go through, which is they have a sort of instinctive understanding that there is going to be a series of decisions around succession, but they don't necessarily have the vocabulary or the tools, and sometimes the professional tools, to actually turn that into a sort of logical decision-making process. And so maybe the first thing I'd like to, ask about is what is the right time for a family to consider succession? Is it too early? Is it too late? How would you describe that to any given family that was moving, say, from first generation and onwards? When's the moment when you first start or should really think about it?
I think it's a good question. I think if you look at the journey, if as an entrepreneur I set up a business, I become successful, I started driving profits, and then obviously some of those profits can then be sort of divested into other areas as we grow. And then potentially, the operating entity may become less important than the investments. But obviously, as time goes by, I may have kids, I may have started a business, with a brother. So I've got these different degrees of complexity. I think at some point, there'll be a point of inflection for any family member to sort of wonder, okay, I've probably succeeded in the first phase of what I plan to do. We've got successful, I've got rid of the debt, we're making some profit. And then you're thinking, okay, so what's next? And I think that then the question arises, are we going to be a family business or be in business for a number of generations? If we are, do we have a plan to achieve that? But also, more importantly, where are we going? So where are we heading to? And I think that the key component, when you build a business, you're driven, you're highly entrepreneurial, your business is probably your baby. You probably spend more time with the business than the family. So, there's going to be a juxtaposition around the relationships as well. I think then the question is that your view of what you're doing could potentially be quite different to those that aren't maybe involved in the day-to-day. Your kids, your spouse, your nephews, your nieces, brother, whoever. And I think so. I don't think it's. There's certainly a too late, which we can come on to later, but I think it's never too early. I think if you're planning for a multi-generational business, and at some point, if you see that as part of your legacy, then start yesterday.
And, we often see that the perspectives in life from, founder or first generation and then, children or second generation, they look at the same reality, but see two very different, two different sets of things, which often creates a very wide gap in expectations. Yes. And when particularly, we'll start maybe with those who are running family businesses and do see the potential for succession there. How easy is it to close those gaps? And do you tend to find that it's more successful starting with the second generation and then working back up to first gen, or really, unless you've got buy-in from the founder, the founding father, or indeed founding mother of the business? Is there a kind of set way that you see that? Have you had experience where some things always work and some things just never work?
Yeah, I think the difficulty is, and for a lot of families, particularly at the founder level, you imagine the journey you've been through. You spend 22 hours a day for X number of years creating this entity, and it's my army, I'm the general, all of the things. So your whole characteristics, your profile, every aspect about you is actually defined by the operating entity, because that's what you've done. And so, firstly, to then suddenly think about handing that over, that is an extremely difficult decision to make. And also to broach the topic, and then you've got to think about your own mortality, and that's the last thing. Particularly, any founder, they can go on forever. An example of a sort of 70-year-old suggesting, "Well, I can sell this business and start another one." The stars and beyond of the limit. There is no limit to it. And so I think that aspect really makes that conversation particularly difficult, because who wants to face up to their mortality? Who wants to give up what defines them? So I think a lot of areas we find is that, in answer to the question, I think typically those with the most skin in the game tend to have to drive the conversation. So you kind of looking to get enlightened senior generations or older generations to hopefully drive it. However, as we know, that's not always going to be the case. And so where we see examples where families may be struggling to get buy-in from the senior generations, we do advise for those around, at least, move on with things collectively as a group, put together your own plans, put together your own ideas and sort of try and bring these people along, or alternatively, try and introduce the senior generations to others that have maybe been through the process, to show them that actually beyond the succession, there is a life. Your life isn't going to end. There are pathways to create. There are things you can do, and there are ways that you can make the succession work and sort of relinquish, to some degree, control, but maybe not ownership, to mitigate the risk, so that you can then start to see how, obviously, the rising generation can sort of step in, should that be what they want to do.
How often is the CFO or maybe family lawyer, maybe the spouse, wife, or husband? How often are they an agent of that trusted advice at the beginning of the process?
I think in a lot of cases, you mentioned about the relationships. If you think about the areas and you go back to sort of the 3-circle model, but you the family dynamics. So how are you wearing when you're having the conversation? So, if I'm talking to my father, does he see me as the son, as a shareholder, as the potential leader of the business? And if I'm then talking about leadership succession in the business, he sees me as the son, that conversation is not going anywhere. And I'm going to get frustrated. He's not going to take me seriously. And then, it's on the shelf for 2 years or something. So I think firstly, we've got to be able to help family groups define what hat they're wearing, depending on what conversation they're having. So that the conversation has actually a chance of talking to your equal on that basis. I'm wearing my shareholder hat. I'm concerned about where we are in the next 5 to 10 years as a family business. We need to sit down as a owner group and have that conversation. Versus I'm the son, I'm the daughter, I'm the uncle, the nephew. So yes, to have a sort of independent or partly interested sort of agent of change can be very beneficial to help sort of broach or start the topic. So having someone that's close enough that has the relationship and clearly has the trust to maybe start, putting some ideas in place and sort of creating the environment to start the conversation can certainly be beneficial.
And given that we know that often the succession conversation will tend to be just a bit late, sometimes verging on the too late. If there are people watching this who are second generation who are concerned about the possibility of succession and whether it means it's for them personally to be the one who's going to directly manage, whether it's liquid assets or indeed the family business, are there things that they could be thinking about, ways that they could be more proactive that will actually move the needle from their side rather than waiting for something which may or may not come from the senior generation?
Yeah, I think there are things. Clearly, badgering your parents, if we use that as an example, may or may not go anywhere. I think what's interesting, COVID actually has, I think, helped put the conversation front and center for a number of reasons. Firstly, COVID, I think for everybody has really made us think about our own mortality. There was a period of time back in March 2020 where whatever you were worth, wherever you were based, we all thought maybe the sky's going to fall in. This is a pretty crazy, scary situation. And then on the back of that, particularly, we saw a number of families who pulled together to manage the crisis and also using the digital way to do so. So suddenly, as a next generation, maybe I wasn't heavily involved in the family business, but now being pulled in to help manage the crisis. So maybe geographically, I'm not near where the family business originated from. I may have been schooled in Dubai or London or New York or somewhere. But yet I can get involved via Zoom or Teams or whatever the method is. And most importantly, we've seen examples where a lot of families not only facing mortality as older generations and realizing maybe, that, well, I can't travel as much, there's greater risk in the world. And also now I've seen what my kids can do. We pulled together as a family unit during the crisis, and the digital aspect has enabled people to engage without having to be there physically. And probably more the two other aspects around it also, that the younger generations have also shown their credibility in front of the senior members of a operating entity. Because again, that's some of the questions. It's not just if I'm the matriarch or patriarch, can the kids do it? But also, how does the senior management feel if it's an operating entity as far as the credibility? You can't just have someone's, nepotism jumping in. That can cause major damage and major issues, for the motivation of your senior management, which is, going to be a massive issue for the family business. And then probably the final bit on that is also younger generations are clearly more digital native. And I think, we see a lot more opportunities. So whether also, for example, if I'm a G2 and I'm looking at ways to get in, digital transformation of the family business, not a bad way to start the conversation on it.
Mm-hmm. So, two things are coming out really clearly from what you're saying. Number one, in a way, COVID has given us opportunities to talk about digitization within the office as a tool, and maybe more than just a tactical tool, but things that we can think about which strategically enable families to work together, particularly obviously, and many of the people in the family office world are working with families that have they're in multiple regimes or different countries, and so the digital aspect of it, I think, becomes relevant. I think at a deeper level, what you're also saying is, if you're a second generation and you want to be taken seriously, either by the previous generation or maybe your peer group, you've got to be serious. Okay, which means taking some initiative on something which may not be absolutely core to the business or the assets, because you may not yet have access to that, but something that says, I'm actually going to take something on and be serious about it. And one of the things which we have found is that it doesn't actually necessarily have to relate to the family business or the assets itself. It can be, I've just taken something else on and been super serious about it, whether it's maybe starting another business or an NGO or something that I've done, academically, or almost in any sphere that says, don't just look at me anymore as the guy who's 15 years old running around, playing football in the backyard, but actually I'm an adult. I can take responsibility for things. And by the way, that may mean that there are things that we could share together in terms of thinking forward on the business. And I think we've certainly, we try and encourage everybody within their own, within their own capabilities and sometimes limitations to say, okay, where can I actually bring that to the fore and, change slightly the sort of image or branding I have as not just son, as you said, but potential leader or somewhere in between. Not everybody in the family has to be a leader. Let's maybe talk about moments of risk or great moments of risks. There are always these opportunities where you can grab an opportunity and upgrade, but often we see that at the critical moment people make they're not best positioned to make the great decisions. Which are those moments that create the greatest amount of risk in making decisions about succession?
Well, you mentioned the sort of question, when is too early or is it too late? There are many stories, but illness, a death in the family, a divorce, possibly an economic downturn, putting pressure. Suddenly the dividends aren't spinning out, and there's issues around the strategy of the business. Or sadly, as we see, a number of families, just conflict within a sort of family group. Actually, no, that's not what I want. And I think a lot of occasions you see where the founder or the founders sort of hold the structure together. And when they're no longer around, it all splits up. And I think, one of the questions we ask a number of families, and it doesn't have to be 100 years, but if you ask, depending on your religion, but say it's Christmas Day, and if you're looking forward 100 years, what do you see for your family on Christmas Day? And if the phrase is, well, actually, I see them all sitting around the table eating Christmas dinner together, then the question is, well, what are you doing about that today to make sure that happens? And so I think that the importance around the connectivity of the family group, the unity, the glue that connects them together, is really key. In an operating entity, that's what you do. So day to day, we do stuff together. Therefore, our relationship is defined by that accordingly. And so, you talk about it over the dinner table, and it's what we do. And obviously, at the point where you transition out of the original operating entity, you lose that. You lose that day to day. You're a liquid family. Looking at spreadsheets, is that as interesting as building a new business? Probably not. But the returns are great. But am I really interested? And does it keep me connected to my, my three brothers and my sister and my niece? Probably not in the same way. And so I think that sort of, realization of sort of your values, your vision and values individually, in addition to you as a collective, becomes really important. Then thinking about, the legacy and the history and what do we stand for? And also the lens by which we make decisions. What is it that we are as a family group? Are we entrepreneurial? Therefore, do we keep developing businesses together? Do we do philanthropic objectives, and do we stand for these three things? And the things that are going to engage, particularly the rising generations, around the idea that if my name's on over the door and I've never worked in the business, why would I be interested? So what else are we doing? I think, certainly things, particularly coming out of COVID, but, ESG, impact, sustainability, questions around getting younger generations, and maybe mixed with older generations, maybe as a step off for senior generations to leave the operating entity to go investments maybe with the younger generations around, ESG and impact, and let the next gens drive that. And that gives you the engagement, but also the exposure to new areas, but the understanding, but also the connection, the sort of replacement of the glue that you might lose when you no longer have the operating entity.
Okay. And what you're, I think, referring to really strongly here is if you can open up particularly on the leadership side, the senior generation, the idea that, maybe there is life beyond the spreadsheet and the P&L and conquering the next market, then you also have an opportunity to look at things which actually potentially add value to the business, but more importantly, give another excuse to sit around the table and talk about other things. I think sometimes within the family business environment, I think there is this illusion that because we're together in the family business, we actually have common aims and values. And what sometimes actually turns out is the only thing that's keeping us together is that we all get a salary at the end of the month or a dividend at the end of the year. And there isn't actually that level of, glue that keeps people together. Often, the conversations that I've had with some pretty serious families is when you get to a certain level and size of wealth and complexity, the family itself is like a company. And so you have to think about, the same sorts of risks and opportunities as you would in a business, you would with a family. Even almost to put down like a SWOT on a family level, forgetting what the business looks like. So, what are we good at?
Yeah,
apart from running a business, what are we actually not so good at? What do we aspire to? Like you say, I love the image of saying, okay, we're sitting around the Christmas dinner 2021. What does that look like in 21? And, there isn't necessarily a bad answer, but like, when you you get in the car and you put a destination in Waze, if you don't put a destination in, there's no way you can build a route.
Exactly. I think that's the key component. Firstly, at an individual level, who am I? What do I believe in? There's a phrase I really like, which is sort of purpose is the reason for the journey. Passion is the fire that lights your way. So can you answer those individually? And then collectively, how do you bring that together? And then how do you find alignment? And then again, if you think about that process, because then that gives you a destination, and then you can start creating the constructs that get you there. Whether it's a family board, a governing board, a family council, the family office, which is managing the investments, which is also aligned. I think that's the key. And then again, your senior management, with their LTIPs and their other incentives around the operating entity that are none, family members. So I think the key that we see is trying to find that alignment. And as you said, a lot of cases you see examples where, and again, quite recently, I was sitting, pre-COVID recently-ish, around the table with two generations and having a conversation. And the suggestion from the senior generation was, I want to control things until I'm 90, he's about 60, 62. And I looked at the two sons and they didn't say a word. And so I left it then, but I spoke to them separately afterwards. And, clearly they disagreed, but they didn't, because of the culture of the family, they couldn't go against their father in that environment. But so, there was only one outcome for that. Should that continue? At the point where dad isn't around, they're not going to adhere to his wishes, in the broader sense. And so I think, having open, honest conversations, having an adult in the room to facilitate those, but also sometimes having them one-on-one before you bring the groups together becomes really important. And really understanding, because once particularly the operating entity is less relevant, maybe your investments have grown way beyond the original business, or maybe you've had a liquidity event, it's not there anymore. So how do you replace that? I think that's a really key question, as you said, because now the family has a large pile of money. It's now going to set up a private office. And so here's the money. We're doing all this, but why do we stay together? What's the reason? The value in staying together, obviously, with the finances are, we get access to better deals, we pay lower fees, we can probably attract better talent, or, we use a great multi-family office such as yours. But, that sort of decision-making piece. But then beyond that, do we just go off and do our own things? Why else would we stay together? And so I think we advise and see a lot of families having to work around, things like your relationships, the structures, the communications, how we, as the governance piece, how we connect and communicate together, and obviously the vision and the values and the legacy. What do we stand for? Why do we do stuff? How do we do stuff together? And what does that look like? And I think, but the key with all of this is assuming that's what you want. Because in some cases you may have a liquidity event, and we've been working at cross purposes for 25 years. The last thing I want to do is do anything with you anymore. Thank you very much. So I think the key also, just because, every book and every webinar suggests you should, I think you should do what's right for you, but you should explore all options. Because I think the one thing we see is that there's no best practice, that there's good practice, and there's best practice for you. So it's got to work for you.
Well, I'm pretty sure we could talk about succession and succession planning for a tremendous amount of time, and maybe we'll get another opportunity to take this topic, or maybe we'll come back and try another ones. But I think if I try and summarize the things that I've taken out of the insights that you brought today, Paul, number one, succession in the end of the day is a process about planning, and therefore, frankly, planning cannot be too early, even if it's a plan which you write and stick in you put in the top drawer for the rainy day. You've thought ahead. You've had some initial thoughts. But
I think just to jump in, sorry, as long as there's emotional buy-in from everybody in the plan, otherwise you might as well gather dust. You might as well use it. That was exactly
and underlying, I think, what you've said, and you've repeated it, is in the end, unless there is some sort of emotional attachment to the process itself, where is the family going? Why are we actually doing this together? We happen to be we're born in a family unit. Does that necessarily mean that we have to continue either doing business together or philanthropy together? That's a topic which most families don't actually talk about, because it is almost assumed, but often that assumption doesn't take into account that over the life cycle of a generation, expectations can grow apart, as they do in life in general. So a first generation, a wealth creator, creating that plan on his own will definitely increase the risk of that plan not being successful. And obviously the second gen making things move without carrying in some way the previous generation will have the same amount of risk. And if we talk about, and I think you put it really well, if you're sort of balancing out succession versus the risks of disaster, the ability to have buy-in on as many of the family members, potentially key advisors within the framework of the family, who are actually part of that decision making, even if in the end the decision may go in a different way, I've been part of that process, then I think you have the chances of a more successful transition. I just want to say, Paul, that it has been a tremendous pleasure having you on today. I think as somebody who wears the professional hat and obviously has gone through some of this stuff personally, it obviously gives you a kind of special insight into the world of family offices and succession. It's been great having you on, and I look forward to having you back in another one of our podcasts. So thanks so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel. It's been a pleasure. And as always, I've enjoyed talking with you.